In 2016, rangers went to save a man who fell in a hot spring in Yellowstone National Park. And when rangers got there, they were already too late. Not like they couldn't find him, but the water already dissolved his entire body overnight. Dissolved. That's the word the medical examiner's report used specifically to describe the incident. The place we are talking about in this video is Yellowstone, which gets roughly 4 million visitors a year. Families, school trips, retirees with cameras around their necks, and just sitting completely in the open with no fence are pools that sit at 199 Fahrenheit, which is basically boiling at that point, with acidity close to 4 pH. People have dissolved in these pools. People went into the backcountry and never came back. There have been some really bad bear attacks on hikers as well. And here's something I honestly kept finding is that the park doesn't publish a comprehensive annual death count. A 2019 ProPublica investigation found the National Park Service systematically underreports serious incidents or injuries. Yellowstone pulls in almost $680 million a year for the surrounding regions. I'm not saying those two are connected, I'm just like putting them next to each other and letting you guys figure it out. So anyway, before starting the video, follow me on Spotify or subscribe on YouTube if you want more of this kind of stuff. Instagram and Discord are there too if you want to hang out or suggest ideas to me, etc. But alright, let's get into this. Colin Nathaniel Scott. So before I get into what happened here, I want to tell you who Colin Scott actually was first. Colin was a 23 years old guy from Portland, Oregon. He had just graduated from Pacific University a few weeks before this trip on May 21st, 2016, with a bachelor's degree in psychology, a normal student. And not just graduated, like he was one of only 2 students named outstanding senior in that whole year. He also spent like 20 months working as a volunteer at the Jackson Bottom Wetlands Preserve in Hillsboro, Oregon, as part of a work-study program through the uni. He was also supposed to start a doctoral program at Portland State University that year. This trip to Yellowstone with his sister, Sable, was basically a post-graduation celebration. He was really into outdoors activities, and he also had a lot of experience with it because of his volunteer work. Now, it was Tuesday, June 7th, 2016, a normal summer afternoon. Colin and his sister parked their car near the Norris Geyser Basin. And I want to give you an idea about this place because Norris isn't just like a pretty part of the park. Norris is the hottest and most chemically intense thermal area in all of Yellowstone. It has pools that cycle between acidic and neutral depending on the season, and sometimes just on mood. And also hydrothermal vents releasing steam and gas, and ground that in some spots will literally burn straight through the sole of a shoe. The boardwalks are placed there because the ground itself is not safe to walk on sometimes. Colin and Sable left the boardwalk. They walked approximately 225 yards off trail up a hill northwest of Pork Chop Geyser, heading into a section that's closed off to visitors. And Sable was also filming everything on her phone the whole time as they walked. Now, the reason people keep doing this is something called hot potting, which is basically just soaking in thermal pools. It can be dangerous. It's also been illegal basically since the park existed, and people still do it to feel thrill. That's all I can really think of. So it's not like Colin and Sable invented some crazy thing that nobody had ever thought of before. Based on what Sable told rangers afterward, they were specifically moving through the area looking for a pool they could get into and soak. That was their whole plan. When they reached a thermal pool, approximately 6 feet long, 4 feet wide, 10 feet deep, with gray murky water you could only see 1 or 2 inches into, gas bubbles coming from the bottom, Colin bent down to check the temperature. He slipped on gravel. He broke through a thin crust of mineral deposits on the edge, and he fell directly into the pool. Sable tried to get him out. The incident report says her phone was still recording during all of it, capturing her trying to reach him. She got minor injuries trying to pull him out, but she couldn't get to him. The pool was boiling, and there was was no mobile service at Norris at all, so she had to run. She ran all the way to the nearest ranger station to get help. The incident was logged at 2:29 p.m. MDT on June 7, 2016. Rangers launched a search and rescue operation immediately. Ranger Jay Corhett was incident commander. Ranger Chris Russell was the investigating officer. Around 8 p.m., so roughly 5.5 hours later after Colin fell in, the recovery team finally reached the hot spring. And this is where it gets really messed up. At first, only his wallet and a single floating flip-flop were visible on the surface. But as the evening set in, the report says his remains floated up. Portions of his head, his upper torso, his hands, visible above the water at that time. Ranger Phil Strail documented what he saw in a written report. He noted a V-neck t-shirt on the remains, and he noted what appeared to be a cross resting on Colin's face. Colin was a dedicated Christian. His family said his love for people came from his faith. Strail's report also states, word for word, due to the report of the individual not previously visible, a lack of movement, suspected extreme temperatures, and indications of several thermal burns, the suspect was determined to be deceased. They tried to get him out. They couldn't. The water temperature had reached 212 degrees Fahrenheit. Multiple lightning storms were moving through the Norris area. It was getting really dark. The recovery team made the call to suspend operations for the night. They left, and they planned to come back the next morning. 8 a.m. June 8th, 2016, they came back. There was nothing there. Not the remains Strail had documented and written about the night before. They spent at least an hour probing the pool with long catch poles. They found nothing at all. Yellowstone Park scientist Anne Rodman, who was present there, told the team on site what had happened. She recorded the pool's temperature at over 212 degrees Fahrenheit at 10 feet deep, which was the maximum the thermometer could even produce. It literally could not read any higher than that, and she recorded the pH level at 5. The official conclusion says, quote, "The extreme heat of the hot spring, coupled with its acidic nature, dissolved the remains. Cause of death, scalding due to submersion in thermal hot spring." But I decided to dig a little more. A pH of 5 is like acidic, sure, but it's not strong enough to dissolve a human body overnight. Black coffee is around pH 5. Tomato juice is around 4, and people drink that stuff. For a body to fully dissolve in water overnight, we need a pH of 1 or 2, in battery acid territory or even stronger. So what actually happened in that pool between 8 p.m. and 8 a.m., I genuinely don't know. The heat obviously played a massive role. 212 degree water does also definitely destroy tissue way faster than acid alone. And there's also the possibility that the pH reading taken the next morning wasn't the same as what the pool was doing overnight. These thermal pools fluctuate, sometimes a lot, but the official report just kind of wraps all of that into one sentence and moves on. Sable was also filming their activities from the moment they left Boardwalk. The phone captured the moment Colin slipped and fell into the pool. It captured her desperately trying to get him out. Ranger Chris Russell was the first person to view it during investigation. He told Sable she might not want to watch it herself. The description of what the video shows is entirely blacked out in the public version of the 60-page incident report, like redacted completely. The video has never been released, and authorities say it never will be, out of respect for the family. The park rangers kept checking the spring approximately once a month after that for a couple of months to see if water level changes would surface any remains. They, unfortunately, never did to this day. Celestine Pool and Crested Pool. Okay, so this next case is from 1981. It's not like an accident, but it's in this video specifically because of what David Kerwin did. David Kerwin was 24, from La Cañada, Flintridge, California. He was Athlete of the Year at his high school, ran track, played basketball and football, 6 feet tall, pretty cool guy. He was taking classes at Pasadena City College and also doing construction work on the side. He liked camping a lot. He and his friend Ronald Ratliff had just finished this long camping trip from Northern California up into Canada and now back down through Yellowstone on the way home. And his family had 3 dogs. His mother told the LA Times, direct quote, "David was always the one who ended up taking care of the dogs. I want you to remember that." On Monday, July 20th, 1981, around 1 p.m., David and Ronald parked their truck at Yellowstone's Fountain Paint vacant pot area and got out to look at the springs. Ronald's dog, Moosey, escaped from the truck at that exact moment. Rate ran straight toward the nearby Celestine Pool and jumped in. Celestine Pool sits at around 202 degrees Fahrenheit consistently. It's basically just under boiling. Moosey starts yelping and barking, and everybody around David and Ronald at that moment could see what David was about to do. Bystanders started shouting at him, multiple people saying, "Don't jump, the water will kill you, don't do it." And David shouted back, "Like hell I won't." I don't know what he was feeling at that moment, but he did exactly what he did. He took 2 steps in, dove head first into the pool. He swam toward Moosey in that hot water somehow, got close enough to grab him and pull him toward the edge. He was doing all of this in near boiling water. We don't have much info on was he screaming or straight up going Chuck Norris mode. But then he went underwater. He came back up near the edge, and at this moment, everybody around the pool saw him struggling to move his hands and trying to hold on to something. Ronald pulled him out, and just from being close enough to help him, Ronald got second-degree burns on his feet. Okay, so here's what witnesses saw when David came out of that pool. His hair was falling out on its own. His skin had already started peeling off everywhere. When someone tried to take his shoe off to help him, the skin came off with the shoe. But somehow he was still alive, but barely conscious. And as they were moving him to a nearby sidewalk, he tried to speak. According to multiple eyewitness accounts and Lee Whittlesey's death in the Yellowstone book, what he said was, quote, "That was stupid. How bad am I? That was a stupid thing I did." He had third-degree burns on 100% of his body, including his head. He was rushed to West Yellowstone Airport, flown to the Intermountain Burn Center in Salt Lake City. He died the following morning, on July 21st, 1981. His father, James, told the news afterward, quote, "He had a really happy life. He liked to travel and he got the chance." And Moosey didn't survive either. Moosey's body was never recovered from the pool. I think he just loved that dog and made a decision in about 2 seconds, and that was the end of it. I don't know. It's one of those ones that just kind of stays with you. Anyway, now there's one more case like this, because this wasn't the first time something like this happened in the park. This was 11 years earlier at a different pool, and this one is about a 9-year-old kid who also had a terrible fate. June 28th, 1970. Andy Hecht was 9 years old, from Williamsville, New York. His dad, James, later described him to the Seattle Times as, quote, "very bright, very outgoing, gutsy. He'd play football with bigger boys and dive for the ball. He was a charmer." His family was on their very first trip to Yellowstone. Mom, dad, Andy, and his 2 older siblings. That day, they just finished watching Old Faithful, and they were walking on a wooden boardwalk through an area called the Upper Geyser Basin. The boardwalk passed right next to a boiling hot spring called Crested Pool. The pool is almost 42 feet deep, and in 1970, no guardrail around it, none at all. The boardwalk made a sharp turn right at the edge of the pool. Andy was walking a little behind his parents with his older brother and sister. His dad said they didn't see exactly what happened behind them. They just heard a splash, and when they turned around, Andy was not there. His sister Margaret was right behind them. She said later, and I'm reading this directly, "I was walking behind Andy. We were going at a pretty slow pace, and I saw him coming close to the edge, and I went, 'Andy, watch out!' Then I heard this splash and I grabbed his hand. I couldn't hold on much longer. Then I couldn't see him because of the steam, and the next thing I knew, I couldn't see him again, and he was down." Nobody knows what actually caused it. Maybe a puff of steam hit him at the turn and he lost his footing. Maybe he tripped, or maybe he just didn't see where the boardwalk went. He managed a couple of swimming strokes. Then he went under. When they recovered what remained of him the next day, it weighed 8 pounds. Oh my god. Bone, flesh, and clothing. I'm sorry to just say it like that, but that's what the records say. Also, we don't have enough information on this case, like what did the Rangers do or how the situation was handled, because it happened in 1970. That night, James Hecht, Andy's dad, couldn't sleep. He was heavily sedated in a motel room, and at around 4 a.m. he got up anyway, sat down, and wrote a letter to the Interior Secretary Walter Hickel about what he believed were completely inadequate safety measures at the national park. James and Amy Hecht spent the next several decades fighting. They testified before Senate subcommittees, filed a wrongful death lawsuit that settled for $23 $100,000, which is a pretty insulting number. But they didn't stop there. Their work led directly to more safety funding across all national parks, better warning signs throughout the whole system, and a proper railing being installed around Crested Pool. The Yellowstone Cannibal Murderer. Every case in this video up to this point has been an accident or a bad choice. Horrible, terrifying things, but they were all accidents. This one is not an accident. It's a murder that happened in the 1970s, and it's genuinely worse than just a murder. James Michael Schlosser was 22 years old, from Roundup, Montana, which is a small town. His dad was a butcher. James had done really well in school, graduated in 1966, gone to college, and he got himself a job as a social worker at the local county welfare department. By every account, a decent young guy starting his life. He used to wear horn-rimmed glasses. He also drove a nice car, a yellow Opel Kadett sports car. He had good camping equipment. And on Friday, July 10th, 1970, which is 1 month almost exactly after the Andy Hecht case, he decided to drive to Yellowstone for a weekend to go camping on his own alone. On his way there, somewhere near the Yellowstone area, he saw a man hitchhiking on the side of the road and pulled over. The hitchhiker's name was Stanley Dean Baker, a 22-year-old from Sheridan, Wyoming. Baker told Schlosser he was also walking to Yellowstone as well, and Schlosser said fine, get in. He probably thought he was just another normal young guy like him and decided to give him a ride. Now, Baker the hitchhiker also had one more travel companion he was hitchhiking with, a 20-year-old named Harry Allen Stroop, also from Sheridan. The two of them had left Wyoming in early June to just kind of wander around the West. But at some point before this, they had split up. We don't know why, but keep that in mind because it matters later. So it's just Baker when Schlosser picks him up. Harry Allen Stroop is not there. That evening, they hit a problem. The road into Yellowstone was closed and the campgrounds inside the park were also full. So Schlosser and Baker, who have known each other for maybe a few hours at this point, drive a few miles north of the park and set up camp together for the night along the Yellowstone River. And that night there's a heavy thunderstorm. Baker would later say, and this is from his own confession, that the lightning combined with the LSD he had taken that evening gave him visions. During the storm, he spoke to the devil. The devil told him he was a member of a satanic cult that had taught him he could gain supernatural powers by eating human flesh. Okay, so in the middle of the night, while Schlosser was sleeping after a long day of driving, Baker took out a .22 pistol he was carrying with him the whole trip and shot James Schlosser twice in the head. James died with the first bullet to the head. Then Baker stabbed him 25 times. Then he cut the body into 6 pieces, removing the head, both arms, and both legs at the knees. He also carved open the chest, took out the heart, and ate it raw. He then cut off Schlosser's fingers, and this is a direct quote from his own confession, to have something to chew on later. God, this is so disturbing and gross, and I'm sorry if any of you are eating while you're watching this, but he dumped everything else into the Yellowstone River along with the gun. Then he got into Schlosser's yellow sports car and drove away. He found Stroop, his original travel buddy, somewhere down the road, and the two of them went in the west direction toward California. Meanwhile, back near Yellowstone, it's Saturday, July 11th, 1970, 3 p.m. A man is out fishing on the riverbank, a normal Saturday, and something snags on his line that is not a fish by any definition. He drives in panic straight to the nearest ranch in shock and calls the police. Deputy Bigelow, who was stationed at Yellowstone entrance, and some fishermen came to check, and they dragged out what appeared to be a human body from the river. It was a male torso, only in shorts, no head, arms removed at the shoulders, legs gone at the knees. The chest and stomach were covered in stab wounds with one large hole where the heart was missing. The coroner, who had seen a lot of things over his career, said he had never seen anything like this in his life. And here's the thing, at this point nobody was even looking for James Schlosser. According to everyone, he just went camping for the weekend. So there was no missing persons report or no connection until now. That changed on Monday morning, July 13th, when Schlosser didn't show up for work. His workplace reported him missing. A message came into the sheriff's office in Livingston. A young man in his early 20s drove a yellow Opel Kadett toward Yellowstone on Friday and didn't come back since. That same morning, Baker and Stroop were on Highway 1 in Big Sur, California, more than 1,000 miles away from Yellowstone, driving Schlosser's yellow Opel, and they crashed it into a truck. The truck driver wanted insurance information from them. Baker and Stroop ran straight into the woods. Highway patrolman Randy Newton, who was called to check on the crash, caught them in just a few minutes. When Newton searched Baker, he found a recipe for LSD, a copy of the Satanic Bible, and a human finger bone that had been chewed enough to remove all meat. God, holy fuck. Baker looked at the officer and said, quote, "I have a problem. I'm a cannibal." Just like that, completely calm. He also mentioned he'd been electrocuted in an accident when he was 17, and he said, "I haven't been the same since," to the officer. On July 15th, both men were taken to county jail in Monterey and extradited to Montana. Baker gave a full confession in detail. He also described the campsite, the storm, and LSD trip, the shooting, all of it. He said he'd acted alone, that Stroop had nothing to do with it, and he described the motive for killing Schlosser specifically as rage. He was enraged at what Schlosser had, and he hated the way he was. A clean-cut, college-educated, employed young man with a nice car and good camping gear. Everything Baker, by his own account, hated, or, according to what I think, wanted for himself. He also confessed to a second murder. 3 months earlier in San Francisco, he had killed a 40-year-old man named Robert Salem as part of what he described as a satanic ritual. At the Salem murder scene, investigators had found the word "Satan saves" and "Zodiac" written on the wall, and had never been sure if it was the Zodiac killer or a copycat trying to make a name for himself. Baker confessing to it didn't really settle anything either. He was never charged with Salem's murder, but when asked about it directly, he took the fifth. When asked whether he had cooked and eaten Salem's missing ear, he also declined to answer. Police went back to the campsite Baker had described to investigate. They found it exactly as he had said. Ground soaked in dried blood, a blood-stained hunting knife that he used to stab James 25 times, human bone fragments, teeth, skin. Baker pled guilty to the murder of James Schlosser, and he got a life sentence for it. Stroop went to trial separately. Baker was called as a witness for him. He told the court he was Jesus Christ. He claimed he had killed Jimi Hendrix by sending a hex from his prison cell in Montana. When asked if he ever considered killing Stroop, he said, "True friends are hard to find." The jury also didn't believe Baker's claim that Stroop was uninvolved in James' murder. A Yellowstone park ranger had already testified that he'd seen all three men, Baker, Stroop, and Schlosser, driving into the park together in the yellow Opel before the murder happened, which, if that's true, changes the whole story. Stroop was convicted of manslaughter and he served 2 years. Baker served 16 years of his life sentence and was released in 1986. He moved to Minnesota, and here's the part that caught me off guard researching this. He became, by all accounts, a top salesman at a sporting goods store, like a genuinely successful one. He lived that way for years until the tabloid TV show Current Affair tracked him down and broadcasted who he was and what he had done in the past. He was fired immediately from his job. He died of liver cancer in Minnesota in 1994. We discussed 3 cases up until this point, and I want to stop here for a second, because I think before we go any further, you need to know what Yellowstone is. A lot deeper than just what the official National Park Service brochure says, but what it actually is, and who understood that long before. Before the visitor centers or 4 million annual tourists with cameras, and before even the name Yellowstone even existed. People used to live there. The Tukudika, also called the Sheep Eaters, they were a band of Eastern Shoshan, and they were the only people who lived inside the Yellowstone Plateau year-round, for at least 11,000 years according to archaeological evidence. They hunted bighorn sheep in the high country, hence their name. They built their shelters from the same pine that still covers most of the park today. They knew every thermal basin, every geyser field. They knew the ground that would burn through a shoe. They knew which areas release gas on still cold nights. They learned all of this the hard way over thousands of years. The Crow, the Blackfeet, the Bannock, the Flathead. At least 26 tribal nations generations have documented connections to this land. They didn't all live here permanently, but they traveled through it, hunted it, held ceremonies on it. Some of their trade routes ran directly through what is now the park, and almost all of them had stories about the thermal areas specifically. The Crow called the region where geysers erupted, quote, the land of the burning ground. The Blackfeet described the steam vents as the breathing of underground spirits. The Shoshone had oral traditions about the boiling springs going back further than anyone has been able to document. In 1870, a group of American explorers called the Washburn Expedition came through and wrote the first detailed accounts of the thermal features that would eventually reach Congress. 2 years later, in 1872, Yellowstone became the first national park in the world. Ulysses S. Grant signed it into law on March 1st. The Tukudika were forcibly removed from the land that they had lived on for 11,000 years within a decade of the park's establishment. The official reasoning was that wilderness should be preserved in its natural state, free from human habitation. The people who had shaped and understood that wilderness for over 100 centuries were considered incompatible with it. They were removed by the 1880s. The park that replaced them now receives over 4 million visitors a year. Yellowstone is one of the largest active supervolcanoes on Earth. The magma chamber underneath is roughly 55 miles long, 20 miles wide, and in some places 9 miles deep. If it erupted at full capacity, the ash cloud would cover most of North America. The last full eruption was 640,000 years ago, and there have been 3 super eruptions in the last 2.1 million years. The ground above that chamber rises and falls by inches every year as the magma shifts. Yellowstone Lake has tilted measurably because of it. The park averages between 1,500 and 2,500 earthquakes a year. Most are too small to even feel, and some make just a little bit of trouble. There are over 10,000 thermal features inside the park boundaries, like springs and pools. More than half of all the geysers on Earth are here in this one place. The water in some of those features has been underground for over 500 years before it surfaces. It comes up carrying minerals, gases, and heat. Some of these gases never make it to the surface cleanly. Some of them pool, and there is one place in the northeast corner of the park where they have been pooling quietly. Death Gulch. This one is just a place inside Yellowstone National Park. It's called Death Gulch, which honestly is a pretty accurate name for it and describes it really well. It's in the northeast corner of the park, near Cache Creek in the upper Lamar River Valley. And by all external factors, it's a pretty normal place. No heat coming off the ground, no weird color, no steam. It just looks like a ravine. But there's a problem with this place, and to actually understand, you need information about how it works. So, Yellowstone is on top of active volcanoes, and those volcanoes are constantly pushing gases up through the ground. 2 of those gases, specifically carbon dioxide and hydrogen sulfide, are both heavier than air. On a windy day, that doesn't matter that much. They just mix with the normal air that we breathe. But on a cold, still night with no wind at all, they sink to the bottom. They get collected at ground level in whatever low-lying area is nearby. At low concentrations, hydrogen sulfide actually smells like rotten eggs, which sounds like at least some kind of warning system. Except it also paralyzes your sense of smell at higher concentrations. So the closer you actually get to a dangerous area, the less you can detect it. So what happens is any animal that puts its head down to graze or drink or just sleep suffocates quietly. No pain at all. That animal just loses consciousness and dies from lack of oxygen in the air. And when one animal dies there, the smell of a carcass draws other animals in. They follow the smell, and they die there too. It's this horrible self-perpetuating thing that the Gulch is just famous for. In 1888, geologists Walter Weed and Arnold Haig were the first people to document it officially. They went inside it and found the remains of 6 bears, an elk, squirrels, rocket hares, and insects, all dead at the bottom of the same ravine with no visible bite marks or or any injury on their body, in a pile basically. Then in 1897, a Harvard PhD geologist named Thomas Jagger led a field team in and found 8 fresh bear carcasses in the same spot. His team carried burning torches as they walked, and the rule was that if your torch goes out, meaning the oxygen at ground level has dropped enough to kill a flame, you turn around immediately. That's pretty smart. Jagger spent the rest of his career thinking about what gases and volcanoes can do to living things. In 15 years after that Death Gulch trip, he went on to found the Hawaiian Volcano Observatory, which is still the institution responsible for monitoring American volcanoes today. So, like, in simple words, Death Gulch basically set the entire trajectory for American volcanology, which is weird, but it's true. And then on June 26, 1939, the same process put 3 men in serious danger. 3 Bureau of Public Roads workers were doing a routine pit excavation near Tower Junction, building a bridge across the Yellowstone River. 2 of them climbed down and hit a pocket of hydrogen sulfide gas just sitting below the surface. They both collapsed immediately. A 3rd worker went down on a rope to pull them out, and he also got affected by the gas. All 3 were eventually rescued somehow, but we don't have a lot of info on the exact details of the rescue. Park records indicate one of the original 2 did not recover and died, though official USGS sources on Yellowstone gas hazards don't include this in their fatalities. Possibly because the death occurred off-site rather than in the park itself, which is, you know, the kind of record-keeping detail that makes you go, a little bit. And then March 2004, over 100 years after Death Gulch was first documented, park biologists found 5 bison dead in a low-lying area near Norris Geyser Basin, miles across the park from the ravine. No predator marks or injuries on the bodies, and when biologists found them, they were lying on their sides, their legs sticking straight out. That means they dropped exactly where they stood, according to reports. The temperature that night also fell to 1 degree Fahrenheit, and the air was completely still. Gas monitors detected hydrogen sulfide at nearby vents above 200 parts per million. The lethal threshold for humans is 100. Separate readings found carbon dioxide in the air above 20%, which is roughly twice the concentration that can kill a person. Cavern Spring. Sarah was a 20-year-old female from Oroville, Washington, which is a very small town near the Canadian border. She graduated from Oroville High School in 1998, and she was going into her junior year at Western Washington University in Bellingham. Biology was her major. She was a straight-A student. Her father, Dan, described her Yellowstone summer like this, quote, "She said it was the most wonderful experience she'd had in her whole life. Everyone she worked with liked her. She said she never felt so loved," unquote. She had only been at Yellowstone for 6 weeks. She was working as a waitress in the employee dining room at the Old Faithful Inn, one of around 3,000 seasonal workers who come to the park every summer, mostly college students just like her who want to experience new things. A friend of hers who was also working there that summer, a 21-year-old named Yuvia Storm, said the 2 of them were having the time of their lives, camping on off days, hiking, making new friends everywhere. Yuvia said Sarah had talked openly about death and her perspective on the afterlife. She told Yuvia at some point, quote, "Tell them I had a wonderful life, no regrets." So the actual tragedy starts around the night of Monday, August 21st, 2000. A group of 8 Yellowstone employees decided to go swimming in the Firehole River. The Firehole River is not a thermal pool. It is a well-known, genuinely popular swimming spot for park employees specifically. Hot springs empty into it from the sides, warming the water to a comfortable temperature. Workers have been swimming there for years. The group relaxed there. Then, around 10 or 11 p.m., they started walking back towards their stations. To get back from the swimming area, the path goes through the Lower Geyser Basin, a wide thermal area 7 miles north of Old Faithful. During the day, it's heavily visited with rangers around, very well marked. But at night, it's just dark. dark. That night, there was no moonlight, and the group had no flashlights either. As they walked back, the group at some point split in the dark. 5 of the 8 were in front. Sarah and 2 18-year-old coworkers were walking behind them at some distance. Lance Buki, who worked in housekeeping at the Old Faithful Inn, and Tyler Montag, who worked in the kitchen at the Old Faithful Lodge. The 3 of them were walking through a thermal basin in complete darkness. They were walking arm in arm. At some point, they came to what looked like a small stream crossing their path. According to the lawsuit that was later filed, they were trying to carefully stay on the trail the entire time. They were used to jumping over small streams along the route, so they jumped. What they landed in was Cavern Spring, a thermal pool 10 feet deep, 10 to 15 feet wide, 18 feet long, temperature at a consistent 178 degrees Fahrenheit. Not quite as hot as Celestine Pool, but hot enough for 3rd-degree burns on contact, and in the worst case, hot enough to kill. All 3 went in. Lance and Tyler both managed to keep their heads above water and pull themselves out of the pool. Sarah went completely underwater. She couldn't get out on her own. The 5 friends ahead heard screaming. They came back running. They pulled Sarah out immediately, and what they saw when they pulled her out, and I'm going to say what the record says as it is, skin already beginning to separate from the body, immediate and total destruction of the outer tissue. Lance Buki had 3rd-degree burns over 90% of his body. Tyler Montag had 2nd and 3rd-degree burns over 97% of his body. Sarah Holfers had 3rd-degree burns over 100% of her body. And there's one more thing. While Sarah was lying on the ground outside the pool waiting for help, barely conscious, she asked her friends to sing to her. She also told them she wanted to be cremated. She wanted her ashes spread over the Pacific Ocean. Then she lost consciousness. Some of the friends helped Lance and Tyler, who were both still standing and unconscious, walk a quarter of a mile back to the parking area to get help. Lance and Tyler were taken by ambulance, then flown to Idaho Falls, then flown again to the Intermountain Burn Unit at the University of Utah in Salt Lake City. The director of the burn unit, Dr. Jeffrey Saffel, said both young men had burns over 95% of their bodies and gave them a 30 to 40% chance of survival. Sarah was taken to the same facility, but unfortunately, she died on Tuesday, August 22nd, 2000, approximately 14 to 15 hours after she jumped. The official cause of death was stated as complications from very severe burns. Lance Buki and Tyler Montag both survived. They were released from the hospital just after Thanksgiving, 14 weeks after the incident. Lance was still in physical therapy even after many months. His medical bills had already exceeded $1 million. He eventually filed a lawsuit against the National Park Service, arguing that the trail through the Lower Geyser Basin should have been closed at night, that the pools were impossible to recognize in the dark, and that the park's own advice to stay on the trails had basically guided them directly toward the danger rather than away from it. The case was dismissed 2 weeks before the jury trial was set to begin. U.S. District Judge William Downs threw it out. The court found the victims were negligent themselves, apparently. Sarah Holfers is, at the time that the script was written, the last person to die from a thermal feature at Yellowstone National Park. August 22nd, 2000. That's the record. 25 years without a thermal death. The last thing she asked for was her friends to sing to her. I looked for what they were singing to her. I couldn't find it anywhere reported. That detail is not in any of the records. The summer of the Wapiti Sow. On Wednesday, July 6th, 2011, approximately 11 in the morning, Brian Matayoshi was a 57 years old man. He was a pharmacist from Torrance, California. He had been to Yellowstone before this. This was his and his wife's 4th visit. That morning, Brian and his wife, Marilyn, drove to the Wapiti Lake trailhead in the Hayden Valley area of Yellowstone. It was a Wednesday morning. The plan was a loop hike through one of the most beautiful stretches of the park, moving from forest into open meadow and back. They were hiking about a mile and a half when they turned around and started heading back toward the trailhead. That's when they walked out into an open area. There they saw a female grizzly bear about 100 yards away. She also had 2 cubs with her. The husband and wife did what you're supposed to do as per all survival guides. They started walking away from the bear calmly back the way they came. But when they turned to look back over their shoulders, the bear's head was up, and she was running straight towards them. Brian said one word to his wife: run. Both of them started sprinting. They ran down the trail screaming and yelling. The official investigation report later noted that this almost made things worse for them. A grizzly can cover ground at around 35 miles per hour easily. The bear covered the distance in just a minute. The bear caught Brian first. The bear started biting him and mauled him with multiple clawing and biting injuries. Marilyn, who was just behind him, dropped to the ground next to a small fallen tree about 5 yards away from Brian. The bear turned to her after brutally injuring Brian. Bear lifted her off the ground by her day pack, then dropped her. She stayed completely still in that situation. After this, the bear left with her 2 cubs. Marilyn waited until she was certain the bear was gone. Then she went to her husband. She tied her jacket around his thigh, trying to stop the bleeding, but Brian was beyond saving. He exhaled his last breath just minutes after the bear and her cubs had left the scene. He died on the trail because of blood loss and injuries. Marilyn walked back and tried to call 911 on her phone. There was no signal. She began shouting for help. Hikers further down the trail heard her and called 911 themselves. 2 park rangers who were already in the area on backcountry patrol were contacted by radio. They arrived at approximately 11:30 a.m. on the attack site. Brian Matayoshi was dead from multiple bite and clawing injuries. He also became the first person killed by a grizzly inside Yellowstone National Park in the last 25 years. The investigation team was assembled quickly by bear management specialists, and they had an advantage that most bear attack investigations don't usually have, which was an eyewitness. Marilyn had seen the bear clearly. She described her cubs, including one with a distinctive blonde face. That description matched with only one bear rangers had been tracking in the Hayden Valley that summer, a female grizzly known to the researchers as the Wapiti Sow. She was approximately 6 to 7 years old and weighed around 250 pounds as per the data at that time. She had no history of aggression toward humans. The investigation team was convinced that the attack was purely defensive. She was protecting her cubs. The running and the yelling had triggered a chase response in a mother bear who felt that her 2 cubs were in danger. If one of her bites didn't hit Brian's femoral artery, investigators noted he likely would have survived the mauling, as most people do. Neither Brian nor Marilyn were carrying bear spray at that time. Carrie Gunther, Yellowstone's bear management supervisor, and Chris Servheen decided not to capture the Wapiti Sow. She was a reproductively active female in a population of roughly 600 grizzlies in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. She acted as a bear in defense. They let her go. When investigators searched for her from a helicopter over Hayden Valley shortly after making that decision, she was 2 miles from the attack site, walking through the valley foraging with her cubs. 7 weeks and 2 days later, Thursday, August 25th, 2011. John Wallace was 59 years old. He was from Chassell, Michigan, a tiny community in the Upper Peninsula right off Lake Superior. He worked for about 20 years at the Portage Lake District Library in Houghton. His library director described him as, quote, a quiet, easygoing man and conscientious worker who loved books, metropolitan opera broadcasts, and the outdoors. He was married, he had no children, but he had 2 Australian Shepherd dogs, one of which died the previous year. He asked for vacation time to come to Yellowstone in his office. He had been to Yellowstone before. He loved this place. On Wednesday, August 4th, 2011, John Wallace entered Yellowstone alone and pitched a tent at the Canyon Campground near Canyon Village. The next morning, Thursday, August 25th, at approximately 7:30 a.m., he set out alone on the Mary Mountain Trail. The trail runs 21 miles through the center of the park across the Hayden Valley open meadows, rolling hills. Rangers consider it one of the highest grizzly density areas in Yellowstone. The trailhead sign explicitly warned hikers that they were in bear country and encouraged the use of bear spray. John Wallace was not carrying bear spray. He was alone as well. About 5 miles from the trailhead. At some point that morning, investigators believe it was probably morning because his lunch was found uneaten, his pack was found partially open and the waist belt was unbuckled as well. Whether he stopped to get something out of his pack or whether the attack caused him to drop it, we don't know because there were no witnesses. What investigators pieced together afterward was Wallace tried to fight back. Puncture wounds on his right forearm forearm showed that he raised his arm to defend himself at close range. He died from blood loss. His body was then dragged off the trail and covered with dirt and debris, what investigators recognized immediately as grisly behavior, meaning the bear who killed him intended to return to his body. His body was found the next morning, Friday, August 26th, by two hikers on the trail, a father and daughter. They reported it to the station. Rangers responded and found the cached body about 5 miles from the nearest trailhead. Bear tracks around the site, evidence of at least 4 bears that visited the scene. An autopsy conducted on Sunday, August 28th, confirmed death by a grizzly attack. Investigators were now looking at the second grizzly fatality inside Yellowstone in the same summer. The Mary Mountain Trail where Wallace died was only 8 miles from the Wapiti Lake Trail where Brian Matayoshi was killed 50 days earlier. They began trapping bears in the Hayden Valley. Over the following weeks, they captured at least 7 grizzlies in the area, took DNA samples, radio-collared them, and released them. Investigators found 9 grizzlies had been feeding on 2 bison carcasses near where Wallace was hiking, including one carcass just 150 yards from the trail. On Wednesday, September 28th, they captured the Wapiti sow, the same female bear with 2 cubs. The next day, rangers transported them to the Grizzly and Wolf Discovery Center in West Yellowstone. On Saturday, October 1st, DNA results came back. Hair and blood samples from the sow and her cubs matched with evidence found at both the Wallace site and the Matayoshi site. Bear fur had also been found snagged in Brian Matayoshi's eyeglasses during the original investigation. She was at both scenes. Whether she actually killed John Wallace or came upon him after another bear attacked him first, investigators said they would likely never know for certain. What the DNA confirmed was that she fed on Wallace's body as well. On Sunday, October 2nd, Carrie Gunther's birthday, the Wapiti sow was euthanized. Gunther was the man who decided in July to let her go. He was also the one who had to sign on to end her life. He spent his career trying to protect the grizzly population in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. Abyss Pool. Il Hun Ro was 70 years old. He was from Los Angeles, California. Beyond that, his job, family, and why he came to Yellowstone, almost none of it is publicly documented. We only know that he came to Yellowstone in his car, a blue 2018 Kia Niro left in a parking lot at the West Thumb Geyser Basin. On the evening of Saturday, July 30th, 2022, Il Hun Ro checked into the Canyon Lodge, a hotel and cabin complex near the Grand Canyon of the Yellowstone, roughly an hour's drive north of where he would sadly die. He spent the night there. The following morning, Sunday, July 31st, 2022, he checked out. At some point that morning, he drove south to the West Thumb Geyser Basin. He parked his car, walked out into the boardwalk that loops through one of the most visually striking thermal areas in the entire park, sitting right on the western shore of Yellowstone Lake, with the water of the lake visible in the background. It's a heavily visited area. There are boardwalks, but no signs. One of the pools along that boardwalk is called Abyss Pool. It sits on the south side of the loop. It is one of the deepest hot springs in Yellowstone at 53 feet deep. Its temperature sits at around 140 degrees Fahrenheit. It's a vivid, deep blue-green color. At some point on the morning of July 31st, 2022, Il Hun Ro went into that pool, and nobody knows what actually happened after that. The park's official statement, released after a months-long investigation, reads like this. The investigation determined, to the best of our knowledge, that an unwitnessed incident involving one individual happened on the morning of July 31st, 2022 at Abyss Pool, and no foul play occurred. Based on a lack of evidence, the circumstances surrounding the death of Roe remain unknown. For more than 2 weeks after July 31st, nothing happened. Il Hun Ro's car sat in the West Thumb parking lot. Nobody reported him missing. Then on Monday, August 8th, 2022, a park employee noticed something floating in Abyss Pool, a shoe sole. He retrieved it with a tool from the boardwalk. He noted that it was odd, but could not immediately explain it. He assumed it might be a piece of glue or rubber that was separated from someone's footwear. He just threw it away. On Friday, August 12th, the same employee, or another employee in the same area, retrieved a second shoe sole from the same pool floating, and again he assumed it was trash, and again he logged it and moved on. Then on Tuesday, August 16th, 16 days after Il-hun Ro was last seen alive, a park visitor walking the boardwalk looked down at Abyss Pool and saw something floating. A black shoe, bottom up, floating on the surface of a 140-degree thermal spring. The visitor reported it to a nearby tour bus driver. The driver reported it to a park ranger. A supervisory ranger, the same one who had pulled out the 2 shoe soles the previous week, went to retrieve it with a tool, reaching just past the edge of the boardwalk to fish it out of the water. When he lifted it, he noticed it was too heavy, much heavier than any normal shoe that size should be. He rotated it, and he saw what looked like a bone. He set the shoe carefully on the ground beside the pool and began clearing the area of visitors immediately. Rangers sealed off the West Thumb Geyser Basin and the parking lot. 3 cars remained in the lot after visitors were moved out. The drivers of the 2 cars returned quickly. The third did not. The third car was the blue 2018 Kia Niro. Rangers searched for the number plate. The car was registered to Il-hun Ro of Los Angeles, California. They called the phone number on file. It went straight to voicemail. An investigator left a message asking Ro to call back as soon as possible to confirm he was safe. He never called back. The following day, Wednesday, August 17th, members of the Jackson Hole and Teton County Fire Department searched the entire area around the pool with a drone, and they found no additional physical remains. What geologists who examined the pool documented carefully was a layer on the surface of the water on the pool's edges. In the official report, it mentions that there were fatty deposits floating to the surface. Geologists took samples of them. The shoe was transported to the Teton County Coroner's Office in Jackson. Investigators confirmed it contained part of a human foot. The shoe was a size 8.5 black sneaker. It was missing its sole, which explains the 2 soles that were removed from the pool a few days earlier. Rangers searched Ro's car. They found his driver's license and his wallet. They found photos, poems, maps, notebooks. They scanned his laptop. They used a translator read through the notebooks, looking specifically for any content that might resemble a suicide note or anything that could give them a clue, and they found nothing. They contacted Ro's family, and a family member agreed to provide a DNA sample. That sample was sent to the Wyoming State Laboratory. On November 17th, 2022, 3.5 months after the shoe was found, and more than 3 months after Il-hun Ro was last seen alive, Yellowstone National Park announced the results. The DNA from the foot showed a match to the family member's sample. The probability of error was less than 1 in 15 million. The foot now belonged to Il-hun Ro. His death was ruled accidental. The investigation was closed. The park stated it had no additional information to share. Nothing else has ever been recovered from Abyss Pool. Not clothing, not personal effects, not remains beyond what floated to the surface on its own. The pool is 53 feet deep. At 140 degrees Fahrenheit, water causes severe burns within seconds of contact. A person who enters a pool like that might not survive long enough to climb back out on their own. The investigation concluded with, quote, "There is no information as to why he might have fallen into the hot spring." The 1925 Lake Hotel explosion. Let me tell you about something completely different that happened at Yellowstone, but in 1925. I genuinely could not find more than a handful of references to this in any popular coverage of the park's history, which is honestly kinda weird. On the morning of June 23rd, 1925, a boiler exploded inside the Lake Hotel. It's an old accident. The Lake Hotel, it's still standing today. It's the oldest hotel in Yellowstone, sitting right on the northern shore of Yellowstone Lake, and the hotel is there since 1891. But in 1925, it wasn't just like a normal hotel. Yellowstone Lake is remote, like genuinely remote. The nearest real hospital was hours away by road, and in 1925, those roads were not what they are now. So everything the hotel needed, the heat, the hot water, the kitchen operations, all of it had to be maintained on site by the people who worked there. Which brings us to the annex. The annex was a separate attached section of the building, not the main hotel where guests stayed. Boiler room, maintenance equipment, utility systems, the stuff that kept everything else running. Staff quarters were there too. And in the basement of that annex was the boiler, and we can say that that was kind of the heart of the hotel. Now, boiler explosions in the 1920s were not some once-in-a-century event. Steam heating heating systems were everywhere back then, and the safety regulations around them were pretty much like all over the place. Pressure relief valves, the things designed to release steam before it builds to a catastrophic level, were not always well maintained by workers, not always well inspected either, so boiler accidents happened a lot. They happened in factories, ships, and hotels. The explosion happened early in the morning of June 23rd. Many of the hotel guests had not even come down for breakfast yet. It was the workers who were already up and near the annex when it happened. When a pressurized boiler goes, it explodes in seconds. The pressure relief valve on this one failed. The investigation concluded the boiler was running above its rated pressure for quite some time, and when it finally exploded, the force of it destroyed a significant portion of the annex structure immediately. Thomas J. Campbell was 34 years old. His job title was fireman, which in 1925 meant he was the guy responsible for maintaining the boiler, repairing it, monitoring it, keeping it running. He was really close to the boiler room when it exploded, and sadly, he died on impact. George W. Downing was 28. He was a kitchen worker. He was just in the wrong part of the building at that time. That's the only explanation the records give. He also died immediately. A third worker, listed only as a laborer in park service records, also died on the spot. His full name was never confirmed in any source I could find. 3 men died before anyone outside that building could even know what just happened. And then there was Henry Mitchell. He was 41. He'd been working at the hotel for 2 seasons. He was critically injured in the blast, badly enough that he couldn't be treated anywhere near Yellowstone, so they had to put him in a vehicle and drive him to a hospital in Livingston, Montana. That journey took almost an entire day over roads in 1925. He made it to Livingston alive, but he died during treatment 3 days later. We don't have any record of how they all died except Henry, because this case is so old that there are barely any sources available. The investigation concluded the boiler was improperly maintained and the pressure relief valve failed, either mechanically or due to a lack of maintenance. Lance Crosby. Lance Crosby was a 63-year-old man. He was from Billings, Montana, which is about 60 miles north of the park's border. He was a registered nurse who was working seasonally at the Yellowstone Park's medical clinic. 5 summers straight in a row, he came to Yellowstone as a worker and as a visitor for most of his adult life. His colleagues at the clinic described him as an experienced, capable outdoors guy. He hiked alone regularly, he was aware of terrain and the wildlife protocols as well. On Friday, August 7th, 2015, Lance Crosby went for a solo hike near the Lake Village area where he worked as a nurse. The trail he was on went through near the shore of Yellowstone Lake. It was a route he was used to, but he did not return that evening. The following morning, Saturday, August 8th, rangers began looking for him after he failed to show up for his shift at the clinic. That afternoon, approximately half a mile from the trailhead, they found him, and his body was partially consumed and then cached, meaning a bear covered it with dirt and debris and pine duff, intending to return to it. This is a specific and recognizable grizzly behavior as we've seen earlier. Investigators from the NPS, Wyoming Game and Fish, and Grizzly Bear Study Team moved into the area. They set hair snares and bear traps near the cache site. Within 24 hours, they captured 2 bears in the area, a female grizzly and one of her 2-year-old cubs. DNA samples were taken from both bears. Hair and saliva samples from the attack site were compared. The results confirmed the female grizzly as the animal responsible for Lance Crosby's death. Her cub also fed on the cached remains. The bear was approximately 259 pounds. She had no prior record of conflict with humans in any recorded log. The physical evidence investigators documented at the scene showed that Lance Crosby was not carrying any bear spray with him, and he was also hiking alone, both of which the park actively discourages, especially in areas of known grizzly activity. His injuries were consistent with a defensive attack, meaning the bear did not stalk or hunt him. Bear probably encountered him, felt threatened, and attacked him. She also had cubs nearby and reacted aggressively. The female grizzly was euthanized, and her 2-year-old cub as well, because it had also fed on the remains. That decision was made by the interagency study team in consultation with Wyoming Game and Fish and the NPS. Under the protocols in place at the time, a bear that had consumed human remains was considered a public safety risk that couldn't be managed managed through relocation or conditioning. So both bears were killed, or had to be killed according to rules. Lance Crosby's colleagues at the Lake Village Clinic held a small informal memorial for him after the news broke. One of them told a local reporter that Lance was the kind of person who was most himself when he was outside, and that the fact he died in the park where he chose to spend 5 summers felt somehow consistent with who he was. His name is on a small memorial maintained by people who worked alongside him at Yellowstone. Silver Cord Cascade. Monday, May 24th, 2010, around 1 p.m., a park ranger gets a call. 2 guys went for a day hike at Artist Point on Sunday. They haven't returned yet, and their friends are really worried. Pretty standard missing person situation for rangers at Yellowstone. Happens a few times every season. Usually ends in a successful rescue. But a rescue team member at the North Rim viewpoint spots something that same afternoon while scanning with binoculars. A still figure on a ledge, climbing gear around it, about 300 feet below the canyon rim. That evening, a ranger rappels in to check. Both men were dead on the ledge. An ice column above them had completely collapsed. Mark William Everick was 28, a carpenter from Bozeman, originally from Casper, Wyoming. Michael Allen Kelk was 29, a project engineer at a construction firm in Bozeman, also from Casper. They were childhood friends who grew up in the same city, ended up back in the same city as adults, and were literally sharing a house in Bozeman when all of this happened. Michael had been to Everest Base Camp, Mount McKinley, Mount Rainier. He had just gotten back from 3 weeks of ice climbing in Alaska, came home, unpacked, and decided to visit Yellowstone. They were both experienced and serious climbers. So what were they doing in a canyon 300 feet down with a collapsed ice column above them? For that, we need to understand the terrain where they were found. About 3 miles downstream from the upper falls on the south rim of the canyon, there's a waterfall called Silver Cord Cascade. It starts at the rim and drops nearly 1,000 feet straight down to the canyon floor. In summer, it's a thin ribbon of water. In winter and early spring, it freezes completely solid. And when it does, ice climbers come specifically for it. Joe Josephson, a climber from Livingston, who wrote a regional guidebook and has done the route himself, described it as not particularly difficult, but quite spectacular. The standard approach is to ski from Artist Point to the south rim, rappel into the canyon, and climb the frozen waterfall back out. It is also completely illegal. Hiking and climbing in that stretch of the canyon are prohibited. Park rangers estimate maybe 1 to 3 people attempt Silver Cord in a year, though the real number is probably higher because nobody's tracking it, because it's not supposed to happen in the first place. On Saturday, May 22nd, Mark and Mike drove to Yellowstone. They told their friends they were going for a day hike from Artist Point on Sunday. Neither of those things were true. They had planned the Silver Cord climb in advance. They brought all the necessary gear, and they knew the canyon stretch was restricted, so they told no one where they were actually going, and they entered the park on Saturday, 1 day earlier than anyone knew. That gap is kind of everything, because when Mike didn't show up to a school construction project in Ennis on Monday morning, his coworkers reported it immediately. Friends called the park around 1 p.m. They said 2 guys had left for a day hike from Artist Point on Sunday and hadn't come back. A rescue team member spotted something from the North Rim that Monday afternoon. Still figures with the climbing gear visible. Now here's where we get like a rough idea of what might have happened that caused their death. Josephson, the experienced climber in the American Alpine Club's official accident report on this case, laid it out clearly. Silver Cord Cascade would be frozen nearly solid in midwinter. But from March onward, the flow of water moving beneath the ice grows steadily. Climbers can't see it from the outside. The ice looks intact and it looks strong enough to climb, but underneath it's being hollowed out. By late May, the ice on Silver Cord was what park officials technically called rotten, a real climbing term for ice that's losing its structural integrity from the inside while appearing normal on the outside. So, the most likely picture is they rappelled in, began their climb, and at some point the column gave up. Whether the collapse knocked them off and they fell to the ledge, or whether falling ice struck them or some combination nobody knows for certain. The park's official position is simply that the ice column collapsed during their ascent. There was unfortunately no investigation beyond that, and no public findings on the exact case either. What we do know is that the timing made everything even worse. Getting the bodies out took until late Tuesday. The Yellowstone rescue team of about 20 people brought in 3 additional climbing rangers from Grand Teton National Park and a private helicopter. The canyon rim sits at about 7,800 feet. It had been snowing off and on for days, closing some park roads. The rotten ice near the ledge kept destabilizing conditions for the recovery crew. One body came out around Tuesday, noon. Melting ice nearly pushed the second recovery to Wednesday morning, even with the helicopter. These are the first recorded fatal climbing accidents at Silver Cord Cascade. The prohibition on that section of the canyon is still in place, and rangers believe that some people still try to climb it. And that's Yellowstone National Park. Some have clean explanations, documented, investigated, and some I genuinely still don't know what to make of due to a lack of information. But the thing that keeps staying with me across all of these is the gap between what a place looks like and what it can become if just a few wrong decisions are made. Anyway, thanks for watching. This one took a while. Let me know in the comments which part of this video you liked the best, and more importantly, what you want to see in the future from this channel. Subscribe on YouTube or follow on Spotify if you haven't yet. It would really make my day. And I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope that you come back for more content. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and everyone have a great night. Sweet dreams.